Duval County Jail responds to inmate health concerns by hiring more than a dozen new medical staff. City equity and inclusion practices are targeted by First Coast legislators in Tallahassee, and Congressman Rutherford's refusal to hold town hall meetings reflects Republican Party strategy. We'll talk about all that and more with our panel of journalists on our Friday Week in Review. Later, we get a preview of exactly what's on tap at the San Marco Beer Festival. You can join the conversation on air by calling 904-549-2937 or emailing firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. It's all ahead this hour after today's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. President Trump has again expressed doubt about helping defend European NATO allies. He says he may not defend them if they don't spend enough on their militaries. European Union leaders met in an emergency session yesterday in Brussels. They unanimously agreed to dramatically scale up their defense spending. However, Terry Schultz reports Hungary refused to approve a joint statement supporting Ukraine.
Recognizing Russia's war against Ukraine as what they call an existential challenge for the EU, the 27 leaders agreed to move forward on ways to come up with as much as 800 billion more euros, 860 billion US dollars, to spend on their militaries. In a separate declaration on Ukraine, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban maintained his tradition of opposing more support. Speaking after the meeting, Orban expressed skepticism about the entire plan.
We just got information about huge sum of money which is impossible to generate from the given circumstance of the European economy. We are not able to fund that.
More details on how exactly the EU executive plans to do that will be presented at another summit later this month. For NPR News, I'm Terry Schultz in Brussels.
President Trump says he is starting the process to shut down the Education Department, an agency funded by Congress. NPR has obtained a copy of Trump's draft executive action directing the agency to be closed. NPR's Corey Turner says some Education Department employees have already been terminated.
Hundreds of staff have been laid off or put on paid leave. The administration has also canceled hundreds of millions of dollars in education research grants. It's kind of ironic. This draft order complains that students have made little progress in reading or math over the years, and yet Trump's Department of Government Efficiency just cut programs focused specifically on improving reading and math instruction.
NPR's Corey Turner reporting. The Trump administration is reopening a massive immigration detention center in South Texas. It's one of the largest detention centers in the U.S., with room for up to 2,400 parents and children. NPR's Jasmine Garsd has more.
Private prison contractor Core Civic Incorporated has reached an agreement with the U.S. government to reactivate the detention center. According to the company, annual revenue is expected to be $180 million. The practice of detaining parents and children was ended by the Biden administration. A court order bars the government from separating migrant families. Border Czar Tom Homan has indicated they will start detaining and deporting them together instead. Advocates have denounced the move as inhumane. The announcement comes just days after President Trump reiterated his promise to conduct the largest mass deportation campaign in American history. Jasmine Garsd, NPR News, New York.
This is NPR.
You're listening to WJCT News, 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning. I'm Stephen Ponson. It's now 9:04. Skaters won't have to go all the way up to Jacksonville once the roller rink planned in St. Augustine opens up later this year. The Ponce de la Roland rink received unanimous approval from the city's Planning and Zoning Board earlier this week. The project is the brainchild of St. Augustine's Melissa Gangame, and she works in real estate. She drives with her daughters up to Jacksonville to roller skate there. Living on Anastasia Island, Gangame says it always felt like something was missing.
We saw a building up for sale and thought it would be a cool spot for like a small neighborhood hangout roller rink.
Her goal is for the rink to host birthday parties, summer camp, adult skate nights, and other events for all the kids and adults looking to lace up their skates. The project still needs final approval from the city, but there is the hope that it will open this summer. A mysterious affliction that causes prehistoric, endangered small-toothed sawfish to spin around and usually die appears to have resurfaced in Florida waters. After a roughly 9-month lull, the State Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission reports there have been 22 reports of the odd spinning behavior in the Florida Keys since December. 6 sawfish deaths were reported. The agency says testing for parasites, bacteria, viruses, and more than 250 chemicals, as well as checks for things like toxic red tide, have turned up nothing definitive. More than 50 endangered sawfish died from the mysterious disease last year. Highs in the lower 70s today in Jacksonville.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Sony Pictures Classics with I'm Still Here, a film by Walter Salles starring Fernanda Torres. A woman is forced to reinvent herself after her family suffers an injustice by the Brazilian government. Now playing only in theaters.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Opinions expressed on the First Coast Connect Week in Review are those of our panelists and do not reflect the views of WJCT News 89.9.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and welcome to First Coast Connect. It's Friday, which means it's time for our First Coast Week in Review. Among our topics, jail officials quietly boost medical staff to address healthcare concerns. State and local government officials jump on the DOGE bandwagon. First Coast legislators take aim at local government's DEI policies. And Congressman Rutherford joins GOP lawmakers nationwide in shunning town hall meetings. To talk about all that and more, I am joined by Nikesha Williams, author and Jacksonville Today columnist. Good morning, Nikesha.
Good morning, Ann. Good morning, Jacksonville.
Also joined by Nate Monroe, executive editor at the Jacksonville Tributary. Good morning, Nate.
Good morning, Ann. Good to be back.
Good to have you back. Also, Tricia Booker, former reporter and current journalism professor at the University of North Florida. Good morning, Tricia.
Hi, Ann.
And Rich Donnelly, anchor and reporter at First Coast News. Hi, Rich.
Hi, Ann. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. I appreciate all you being here. Before we get to the headlines, I just want to acknowledge some industry news. Our regular guest and longtime Metro columnist at the Florida Times-Union, Nate Monroe, has had a change of address and a change of title. Nate, tell us a little bit about your new gig as executive editor of the Tributary.
So I, as the name implies, I'm running the sort of editorial operations at the Tributary. That also includes helping our publisher, Deirdre Connor, run some of the kind of business aspects of the nonprofit. Look, this would have been 12 years for me at the Times-Union. As a lot of listeners know, the JEA sort of saga substantially wrapped up last year. That was a story that really, for me, began in like early 2018. I was really committed to seeing that through for the paper to sort of whatever conclusion, really wanted to bring that home. And for a long time, had the conclusion of that as, in my mind, a bit of a demarcation to start thinking about, what was next. I had some discussions with the Tributary at various points about whether there was kind of space for me over there when they, had a need last year for an editor. It just seemed like a really exciting opportunity. Nonprofit news, I think, is something that is kind of in the frontier of journalism right now. And there's a lot of sort of growth potential. There's a lot of ways we can sort of have a lot of fun, I think, doing important journalism. So it's basically it's just a good, fun gig, and it was kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah. And we should say, of course, there's Jacksonville Today is sort of the WJCT news nonprofit, which also does great work. And we've got a collegial relationship, I think, between those organizations. A lot of people are going to miss you at the TU.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Look, columnists have a season. And I felt like, in addition to the JEA stuff being over, we had kind of just gotten through an election. I'd been writing about, city government for a long time. Frankly, there's only so many city budgets that you can kind of get pissed off about before it sort of all blends together. So I needed a change as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's important to recognize when it's time to move on from something too.
Yes.
So, well, congratulations.
Thank you.
And of course, we encourage everybody to continue to support the daily newspaper.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I have great friends that work there.
Great
They
people.
do excellent work. This was my taking this job was by no means a statement about the paper whatsoever.
Yeah, very talented people over there. All right, I want to move on now to a topic that has been a national headline, but is also increasingly becoming a local headline. Rich, this is the local impacts of DOGE. We're seeing downtown particularly could be impacted by some closures and some layoffs, including at a few really landmark buildings downtown. So what do we know, first of all, about what those impacts could look like?
Well, it could be even more vacant buildings downtown should all of these, reduction of staff and removal of office space, actually go through with DOGE. Army Corps of Engineers could be moving out of the North Bank area of downtown Jacksonville to the South Bank or even South Side, completely out of downtown. And this has been more than just a trickle-down effect. I almost think that there are lawmakers at different levels of government that are almost trying to out-conservative the next one or the one before that. And it's a weird place for, I feel, a lot of journalists to come from and a lot of people in both sides of the aisle in the private sector, because for years, many people have said, well, there's too much waste and we have to clean up the waste. And if we eliminate some of the red tape, then we could possibly pay down the national debt or be more efficient. And then when a president and an unelected official and Elon Musk come in and say that they're going to do that, well, now you're doing too much. And then when it trickles down to the state university system or, federal agencies, but in a non-elected workforce, all of a sudden there's a lot of pushback. And I find it a weird juxtaposition of, well, what did you want? Because if they are going to eliminate waste, and I look at this from the VA perspective specifically, because that's the story that I was focused on last week.
Big cuts expected there.
Huge cuts expected. So far, they have said that none will directly affect veteran health care. With that amount of high numbers, you question how that's going to be possible in some respect. I did speak to one person in the Jacksonville area who is not a healthcare provider with the VA, but worked in patient advocacy and finding them the right avenue of care that they would need. And he was not laid off, but through a different avenue is no longer in his job right now. And while that's not directly veteran care, he's not a clinician. He's not, handing out medicine or, fixing a broken bone. There's a level of veteran care that will not be received because he is not in his position. So it's semantics. The power of a definition is going to be really strong in going forward with this. But I do think that there is going to be significant reduction in overall finances. Will that eventually help what a lot of people were complaining about to begin with?
Tricia, one of the targets of this effort to reduce spending, there are state efforts as well to mimic this DOGE, these cutbacks, and the state university system, which you're a part of, is also a target. One particular focus right now is the former president at the University of Florida, Ben Sasse, who was appointed by Governor DeSantis, then left office under a cloud of millions of dollars of questionable expenditures.
Yeah, this is kind of baffling to me that when Ben Sasse came in, he was supported by state officials, by DeSantis, who's kind of handpicked. He spent millions of dollars that he shouldn't have spent. I think everybody agrees. And now they're saying, okay, well, here's the waste in the university system. That kind of waste has been around for a long time. So why are we targeting instead research grants and DEI initiatives that are actually helping students? I mean, I'm happy that they're finally focusing on the money that's wasted at the top, but really who's going to suffer is the money that they're taking away from the meat and potatoes of a university.
Nate, I recall you writing a few years ago about the appointment of Ben Sasse and getting some blowback for saying that was not smart, not a good appointment, that he wasn't particularly qualified. I'm not asking you to do any chest thumping here, but I
would never imagine doing that.
But in terms of how these, whether it's downtown development impacts or college impacts because of state initiatives, what is the read on how this is going to be impacting everyday folks?
It's an interesting question. I suspect that a theme for the rest of this year and maybe beyond, these guys talk about cutting the government, and like the federal government just sort of becomes an abstraction in these debates. What is the federal government? Well, it turns out the federal government often might be your friends and neighbors. And when you start cutting huge swaths of the government kind of just arbitrarily, you're going to be impacting actual people all around the nation. The federal government isn't just based in Washington, D.C., as we're learning. There's a significant footprint here in downtown Jacksonville. There's a footprint in Omaha and, small towns in Wyoming. Often in a really small town, one of the newer buildings will be the post office building, right? The federal government has an enormous footprint. It touches our lives in ways that we don't always see, often because that means those systems are working and just kind of humming beneath the surface. But when you upset them, I think we could very well see a lot of turmoil brought, in some cases quite literally to our doorstep.
And Nikesha, in terms of the people who work for the federal government, we do know that a large number of them, as many as half, are veterans. So that is one impacted workforce. But there's also this uncertainty. Earlier this week, it was reported that the Charles Bennett building downtown, the federal building, was on the DOGE list of unnecessary buildings. The following day, that was removed from the website, saying more information was to come. But there's offices that work out of there, the IRS, HUD, Department of Labor, all of those potentially jobs that wouldn't be downtown anymore.
It's jobs that wouldn't be downtown anymore, and it's a continued gutting of the middle class and now the working class. When you talk about the federal government and you talk about federal government jobs, you're also talking about civil servants. All of those jobs are not based in Washington, D.C., as Nate said. Everyone who works at the post office is a federal worker. The 3 military bases that we have in Jacksonville, Mayport, NAS Jax, and Blunt Island, those are federal workers. HUD, as you mentioned, the IRS, as you mentioned, all of those are federal workers. So when you start slashing government in the name of efficiency, you are cutting people's jobs and you're cutting their livelihoods. There is no such thing as trickle-down economics. It's just not real. That's a Reagan-era narrative that did not work as the economy suffered under mass inflation in the 1980s, and we're about to see it again. Eggs are $9, right? Eggs are $9.
A dozen, not individually.
A dozen
Yes.
eggs are $9, and that's only going to go up. And we're talking about we're slashing the government and getting rid of the waste so that we can give $4.13 billion in tax cuts to billionaires. Really? That's not getting rid of waste. That's just moving the pieces on the chessboard so that you can seem like you're doing something when you're actually harming the very people, some of whom voted for you. And no one asked for this.
I want to take a call from Matt in St. Johns County. Good morning, Matt. Go ahead.
Hi there. I was calling about the comment regarding the VA benefits and the proposed cuts tied to veteran health care. Do we have any information about the non-health care related VA benefits? Like, for instance, my father and many other seniors receive what's called VA aid and attendance, which helps with assisted living and retirement home costs. Do we know anything about that? Is that on the table, or are we still kind of in a wait and see mode?
Matt, it's a good question. I don't know the answer. And it's safe to say there's a ton of uncertainty surrounding all of these cuts, much like tariffs, we've seen kind of back and forth, news. But do you have any more information about that, Rich?
Hopefully I can shed a little bit of light on the caller's concerns. I was actually speaking with the press secretary of the VA last Friday about the story that I did just the day before, which was somewhat alarming that the press secretary of the VA had my cell phone number, but he did somehow. There's the federal government for you. He told me that at that time they were reviewing contracts of non-VA employees. I don't know, to that caller's point, if his did he say his father receives home care? I don't know specifically if one of those contracts would be that person
or that service,
or if his service is directly a VA nurse, for example. Under what has been publicized so far, if it's a VA nurse, that position was going to be safe.
But all these contractors,
the contractor is everything's on the table. The secretary of the VA said that in his estimation, $2 billion in savings could be realized with the contracts being eliminated, but that was all under review. But he said 300,000 VA jobs were considered safe because those were directly affecting veteran care. So again, I don't know exactly what that caller's situation is, but that's what I know right now.
Let's go to John in St. Augustine. Good morning, John. Go ahead.
Yes, just a general statement. It seems like the impression I'm getting from hearing a lot of commentary here and other places is that the federal government should be some sort of a jobs provider just as a social benefit. And that really shouldn't be true. Just like any business, if you have people that you don't need, or if you hire people just to, for example, put more people to work or make stats look better, then that's not right. And so unfortunately, at some point, you have to undo that. And you have to get rid of people that you don't need, especially if you're broke. And that's what I see happening right now. It's sad when anybody loses their job, but just because they work for the federal government doesn't mean that they should stay employed if we can't afford to pay them.
Thanks, John. Tricia.
I think that John has a very good point that we shouldn't have waste in government. The problem is that there's no way of knowing, due to a lot of lack of transparency, whether these people were needed or not, because the cuts are going in and then we're going to reassess, okay, were they needed or not? And what you're seeing, John, is that a lot of these people who were fired are being brought back very quickly because they were needed and because the cog of the administration is just not working without them. So I think, yeah, there's a way to filter out waste in government. I don't know that this is how to do it with this lack of transparency in how these decisions are made.
Nate.
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of build on that, I feel like this is a little bit of a false choice. It's like saying, do you like rainbows or do you want terrible things to happen all the time? Like, obviously, everyone agrees that the federal government shouldn't employ people it, like, quote, doesn't need. The problem in the debate is whether these guys, you know, these just sort of young neophytes who don't know much about the federal government are walking into these buildings and sort of burning through contracts, maybe laying people off, maybe not, terminating leases. Like, where is the justification that this stuff wasn't needed? Where are the studies that show that we don't need these things? How are they tracking whether or not these cuts are effective? Like, there's just no evidence that they're even interested in figuring out if what they're doing is good. It really seems, and there's just a lot of reporting that I think backs up the idea that this is all just very arbitrary.
Yeah. Got a call from Daryl in St. Augustine. Good morning, Daryl. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. The federal government spends trillions of dollars, and early in the reporting you said that 1.5% of the population are federal employees. That's a really, really, really small number to run a business that large. I run a business, and 30% of the revenue goes to employees. God, could I make a lot of money if I could run my business with 1.5% of my revenue being employees.
Thanks, Daryl. Good point. We've got a call from Linda in Mandarin. Go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to address John, and when he said that America is broke and we are not a job creation. And if we were actually, letting go of all these veterans and individuals to go toward the debt reduction, that might make sense. But this is to free up money for a $4.5 trillion tax cut. And if he was concerned about the budget, 25% of our current budget overflow that we're in debt for was due to the last tax cut. So they're having us look over here at the chaos of the cuts, but we're not demanding that they show us how is this going to actually reduce the deficit. It's not intended to. We're going to be in an uproar trying to fight for to get their jobs back, and they're in the meantime, going to be giving more social welfare to Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. Would look at the contracts they've gotten over the years. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. I want to move on now to a topic that is possibly going to affect our local government, Nikesha, but it's happening at the state level by some lawmakers that actually hail from the First Coast. Senator Clay Yarborough, Representative Dean Black, both from this area, proposing a law that would crack down on the local government, any local government's ability to implement equity and inclusion programs. Um, what are the implications of this, and what is the feeling? I mean, there's obviously this is part of a much larger trend, right? And there already has been local criticism of, for instance, Donna Deegan's DEI chief. The city council held back funding from that role. This is accumulation of a lot of you know policy initiatives landing here.
So I think the first question that we need to ask is like when we think about the words, the term DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, why is that so offensive to some people that they would seek to resegregate the state and local government, classrooms, and school systems? That's the real question and the real conversation that we need to have. Because if you're telling me that we want to roll back these DEI initiatives and have a merit-based society, then you wouldn't have needed DEI initiatives in the first place, and Black people wouldn't have a saying that you have to work twice as hard to get half as much. You wouldn't have an understanding that as soon as you get a job or you get into a position that you are assumed to be an affirmative action hire. The only reason those laws and safeguards were put into place is that for decades, people who have been minoritized and strategically disenfranchised in this country were discriminated against, and it was legal. The reason that you had the Fair Housing Act, the Civil Rights Act, Brown v. Board of Education is that because discrimination was legal, prejudice was legal, separate but equal was the law. And so there had to be safeguards put into place that would allow people who did not have white privilege, who did not have the ability to pass, to get into places that they were legally barred from. And so now you want to take those safeguards down as if racism has been eradicated, which we know it has not, and say that we're going to have it to be merit-based. I'll go with the last Supreme Court Justice confirmation of Ketanji Brown Jackson. She was the most qualified candidate of all the last few Supreme Court Justice confirmations, including Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett. She was the only one who had experience as a defense attorney and as a public defender. She had clerked for several Supreme Court justices before she even got onto the bench, and all of her other accolades. And yet all people could see was that Joe Biden said he wanted to nominate a Black woman to the bench. And so obviously she must not be qualified,
right,
when that was a lie. So why do you want to resegregate and relitigate the past that we are supposed to be rising above from by removing these protections when we know it's just going to make things worse than they already were?
I'm curious at the local level, Nate. We know that for instance, the HRO, the Human Rights Ordinance in Jacksonville, was kind of a hard-won protection for the LGBTQ community that passed in 2017. But that, I would guess, like any other initiative that addresses a specific group and advocates for some sort of equity or inclusion, that could be imperiled.
I would assume so. I part of what strikes me about, legislation like this DEI thing has sort of become a stand-in for, it seems like, anything a Republican lawmaker doesn't like. So I'm not sure that I understand what exactly would be affected. Another example might be, part of the stadium renovation agreement, the overall agreement, and I think the most popular part is one that would that proposes spending additional money on the east side. Well, the east side is a majority Black neighborhood. There is some recognition that neighborhood's been neglected by the city. Is that DEI or not? I mean, is that going to be something legal? Are cities going to be allowed to catch up neglected neighborhoods in their cities and invest in them? Or are they going to have to, write spending laws in ways that obscure that? I mean, I just don't understand, what they're even targeting. I will say it is notable, a through line with this legislation is that the legislature has, over the years, with increasing zealousness, centralized power in Tallahassee and has taken away power from local governments to kind of run their own affairs. And this is very much, so in some respects, kind of part of a long-running project that we've seen out of Tallahassee.
Tricia, this is similar to some other legislation that's passed in recent years insofar as it would allow citizens to sue if they felt that their local government was not following the law. For instance, if the government was implementing some sort of inclusion or diversity program. So it sort of enables the citizen, kind of like with the homeless ordinance, to
Yes.
take the government to court.
Yeah, and I think, in like Nate was saying, the whole idea of the DEI is very ambiguous. People don't really know how to interpret it. I have a friend who runs an organization that supports children of marginalized neighborhoods and who are economically disadvantaged. They depend on a ton of grants. And I said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And he said, "We're going to change our language. We have to obscure our real mission." In addition, he's saying some of the companies they used to go to, the corporations they used to go to ask for support, those companies aren't going to support them because they don't know whether they are going to be doing DEI initiatives, and those companies would then be boycotted. I mean, I think these practical implications that are so unclear or kind of unanticipated results of this.
But anti-DEI is only ambiguous to people who do not live on the margins.
I'm
So,
not saying that DEI is ambiguous. I'm
Mhm.
saying the way the law is going to be written is ambiguous. People don't know what's okay and what's not okay. And so as a result, you have these organizations that are literally skirting the law so that they can continue their mission without using these terms,
Right. I mean, there was a woman recently interviewed, Nikesha, who was on NPR talking about, works at Northwestern, and she has long run, she's like one of the biggest NIH grant recipients in the country. And she said that her university asked her to scrub all mentions of, women specific science research that she'd done. But she literally, that's her area of research is women's health.
my day job is at a nonprofit that receives lots of grant funding. It's not federal funding, but it is grant funding. And we are having to do this exact same thing. We'll go through our language where we were once very loud and proud about being a social justice organization, organizing for a multiracial, pluralistic democracy. All of that is being scrubbed. We aren't talking about any of those things. Everyone is having to adapt their language and their narrative to not piss off the Republicans in power who don't want to see a world who don't want to see government and representation and power given to people that looks more like the country that they are supposing to run and the states that they're supposing to run than it does. This is a power grab. And so if it's anti-DEI, if it's anti-CRT, whether we call it resegregation, whatever it is, it's very clear what they are doing. They are doing whatever they can to remain in power, writing ambiguous laws that target people on the margins, and then pulling funding from any group that they might think might get to a point where they can become whole.
We've got an email from Barbara. She says the purpose of DEI is not to put ill-qualified, marginalized people in jobs that white men typically have. It's to ensure jobs are given to marginalized people who are more qualified than white men. John on Facebook says the cure for racism is not more racism, and that's why DEI has to go, because it has become racist, segregating people by color and also advantaging people by color. If you're just joining us, we're talking about the week's biggest headlines with our panel of journalists. I am joined here by Nate Monroe, Tricia Booker, Nikesha Williams, and Rich Donnelly. And you can join our conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email First Coast Connect at WJCT.org, or you can reach out on social media. We have a call from Ed at NAS Jax. Good morning, Ed. Go ahead.
Good morning. Yes, hearing some of your guests there, and it feels like I'm listening to a radio podcast from 1964. This is 2025. Okay, the vast majority of the American people, including some minorities, are against special treatment based on race. They want it to be based on merit, on qualification, on experience. Just like the NFL and the NBA, their top players, which are overwhelmingly blacks, are there not because of the color of their skin, but because of the high quality in their skill, in the hours of practice and sweat that they put on to get the jobs. And believe me, as a Jacksonville Jaguars fan, we don't care if 100% of the team is made up of Eskimos, as long as they're winning. That's what we want. We want a winning team, not a percentage of race players. Also, last thing is to Nate. Nate, I have disagreed with you about 85% of the time, but I always read all your articles, and I look forward to continue to do that and wish you the best of luck.
All right. Thanks, Ed. We're going to move on now to a topic that has been in the headlines sort of initially locally over questions about Congressman John Rutherford, whether he was going to hold a town hall meeting. He'd been petitioned to hold a town hall meeting. But that has sort of spiraled nationally into a directive that Republicans not hold town hall meetings in their congressional districts. That's coming from the speaker. Nate, first of all, you've reported previously on Congressman Rutherford's willingness or unwillingness to hold local town hall meetings with his constituents.
You mean that there is someone paid by the federal government who is not doing their job that we could maybe cut out of the budget? Yeah, I mean, this is not a new thing. I think lawmakers, and this is probably true with members in both parties, don't do town halls the way that they used to. Frankly, I do think there is probably something to the idea that people show up and hijack them and make them not really about town halls anymore. Nonetheless, I think that these members of Congress need to be more thoughtful about how they're engaging with their constituents. I think the perception people have, and it's not an incorrect one, is that it's very, very difficult to actually get in touch with your member of Congress. It shouldn't be. Their office should be responsive to you. There was a time when members of Congress took a lot of pride in their constituent services. I think as things have become a lot more partisan, I feel like that stuff is just not as prioritized anymore. And, if John Rutherford's going to stop doing town halls, he needs to propose what he's going to be doing that still allows people to give him meaningful feedback and actually connect with him.
Yeah, and Rich, I know that John Rutherford has said, look, I'm not going to hold these meetings. These are just a platform for people to scream. And he described it as kind of a mob mentality. But he did say that if people contact his office, that he'd be willing to schedule meetings. The people who have been, writing onto that petition and signing it have said, it's not possible for him to meet with all of us. That's why we would like to have a group meeting. But it is not necessarily an easy time for any politician to go in front of big crowds, because there are people, as Nate said, that do go to try to stage moments just for virality.
Absolutely. There's certainly a small subsect of society. Some might not even be represented by that specific congressperson who would go to a town hall just to cause a ruckus or make a scene and hijack it. I was covering the protest at John Rutherford's Jacksonville office 2 weeks ago, and outside the front door of his office is a sign that says, "This office belongs to the people of the 5th District of Florida." And the door was closed and was only being sometimes answered through a Ring doorbell system, and eventually JSO was called and escorted the people out of the building. And to be fair, the office does share a building with doctors and other businesses, so it is not a government-owned building, and the people who were protesting were very politely told by JSO, you are allowed to do what you want to do on the sidewalk outside the building. But we contacted John Rutherford's office that day. We were told that he was in Jacksonville, and we were told that he was not able to meet with us, the media, at that time, that his had meeting schedules prevented that. We are, to a large degree, a voice for the people, and if we couldn't get a hold of the congressperson with media channels, I could understand why it'd be very frustrating for his constituents to get a hold of him.
Got a call from Jerry in St. Johns County. Good morning, Jerry. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you. First of all, I wanted to shout out to two of my favorite guests on your show, Nate Monroe and Nikesha Williams. Thank you for all you do. My comment is really about Representative Rutherford. He needs to hold a town hall. He needs to publicly listen to the anger of his constituents. That is his job. We don't need to have to figure out how many people went to see him, how many people are angry. The rest of the country needs to see how angry Americans are at all these different issues that go on. Personally, what I decided to do was reach out to Representative Maxwell Frost to see if he would hold a substitute town hall, and I believe that some of the politicians are doing that. And if he can't do it, I'll contact Joshua Wheel, who is also running. Well, he's for District 6, but I want someone to recognize that politicians are not listening to people, and that's their job, and we hired them.
Thanks, Jerry. Tricia.
There was, when I read the article about Rutherford appearing before the Federalist Society and talking about how the real problem in Washington is that there's no bipartisanship and there's no one working with both sides of the aisle, saying this with a serious face, just months after he voted against bipartisan immigration policy, I thought, well, no wonder he doesn't want to hold a town hall meeting. I mean, when you say he needs to hold a town hall meeting, yeah, he does, but it's more like he should. He really doesn't need to, and none of these Republicans do, because they have formed such a hard ball together, and nobody's swaying from it, and they don't really care what both sides of the aisle think anymore. They just don't.
John Rutherford barely held press conferences when he was the sheriff. So, I mean, let's start there. It's not new for him to not address the people of Jacksonville.
Although he did used to do walks.
He did walks. He would do stage media events. But as far as being readily available and present, that wasn't his style. And so the fact that he's not readily available and present as the representative for the 5th District is also not a surprise. It's cowardice. I'm going to call it what it is. He's being a coward. Do people hijack these moments to protest? Yes, but according to my knowledge, we still have the right under the First Amendment to peaceably assemble and to petition the government. He needs to hear from the people about whether or not they support what he supports since they voted for him. If he supports Donald Trump and Elon Musk and wants to stand 10 toes down on it, then say that to your constituents and listen to what they have to say back.
Yeah. Nate, I want to move on to a topic that the Tributary has covered quite a bit and has actually gotten a lot of momentum, in terms of policy changes because of this reporting. This is primarily done by one of your investigative reporters, Nicole Manna. She's reported on the healthcare concerns at the jail. Can you sort of catch us up on the latest developments that you've learned?
Yeah, Nicole learned only through a public records request that a national accrediting agency had placed the jail on probation. They lifted that probation because the jail and its new healthcare provider, a company called NAFCare, it's a private medical provider, has added staff, more than a dozen staff, to boost medical care. This is a good development. And part of what was interesting to me about the story, this is a good thing. But JSO did not publicize this at all, did not talk to us about the story. Again, it was, Nicole requested these inspection reports and essentially learned about the lifted probationary status through that. And so I don't know if it's maybe a general refusal to acknowledge there was ever a problem at the jail. Well, that's silly. There was a problem with inmate care at the jail. But that really struck me about it, particularly because I, and I'm sure others at the table have heard complaints from JSO over the years about their perception that the media doesn't cover them fairly. Well, this was a good thing, and we covered it without their cooperation at all.
It's interesting. I mean, the jail quality of care has been really at issue, though, when it comes to the idea of building a new jail. And you've already reported that switching to a different medical provider, that the deaths in the jail dropped by 50%. So there's sort of this very real understanding of that there was a problem, that it needs to be addressed, for instance, in a new jail facility. Right.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so there is kind of a weird dialogue about healthcare at the jail. It's like it sort of is like both an issue people are aware of, but also not. I also think a large impetus for moving the jail is economic development in downtown, which is kind of something beneath the surface people don't seem very willing to acknowledge.
Right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Nate Monroe, Nikesha Williams, Tricia Booker, Rich Donnelly, thank you all so much. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Ann.
All right. We'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back. Well, we're going to turn briefly now to our colleague at WJCT News, resident gearhead Dan Scanlon, who covers the most aristocratic automotive event of the year, the Concours d'Elegance in Amelia Island. And he joins us now live by phone. Good morning, Dan. What's the scene up there right now?
Well, and right now, if you want to drive a Porsche, a Ferrari, or a BMW, you can sign up to do that driving. The road tour of some of the cars in Saturday, yes, that's right, Saturday's Concours d'Elegance just went by, and there's some amazing cars. But the big news is with the 70+% chance of rain on Sunday, the organizers at Haggerty have moved the Concours d'Elegance with its 240-plus cars to tomorrow, Saturday, from 9:30 to 4:30. That means the Cars and Caffeine car show is not happening, but the Radwood show across the street for the 80s and 90s cars is. The stuff that's happening tomorrow will happen or will be moved today, like the seminars and things like that. But it'll all be over before the clock turns and we can all sleep in on Sunday.
So how are they getting the word out? I would imagine that there's people who've already bought tickets to this event.
Yes, they put out a large number of Facebook and social media posts yesterday. If you bought a ticket, you got the email. There's a Concours Facebook page for the car community, which also got it and posted it a lot. So there's people out there griping that they won't get their money back. Well, they will. If they were in the Cars and Caffeine tomorrow, they'll get a refund. So it'll just be a jam-packed day. This is the fourth time in 30 years for this show that rain or a forecast thereof has pushed the show to a Saturday. And then there was one dreadful monsoon day where everything was in the ballroom and the auction tent. But the Concours still got done. Founder Bill Warner managed to get 5,000 people to show up at that one, despite the fact that I couldn't see my hand in front of my face driving here that morning.
They've been fairly fortunate. We mentioned that you're a gearhead. You are a huge automotive fan. You now have a new column that appears in Jacksonville Today. What are you most looking forward to up there? What are you excited about?
Well, there's Formula One cars. Helio Castroneves is the honoree. You may know him from winning a Dancing with the Stars competition and also winning 4 Indy 500s. He is an ebullient, fun kind of guy to hang out with. It should be a lot of fun. There'll be a bunch of his cars here. There's going to be safety cars like the Bricklin. There's going to be critter cars. I don't know what that is. There's going to be some Wild Alfa Romeos and Ferraris and 240-plus cars, you name it. It's going to be on the grass of the two fairways at the golf club the golf club next to the Ritz-Carlton tomorrow. And they still expect probably 10 to 20,000 people despite. So that's going to be a big crowd.
Yeah, and so big crowd. This is taking place on Amelia Island. They've been doing it for years and years now, so they have a pattern down. But what tips do you have for people that might be first-time attendees? How do they deal with the traffic? Where do they park? What do they do?
They can park at the airport. There are satellite parking lots as well. Police are saying if you park too close to the entrance of the facility of the Ritz-Carlton, you will get ticketed. I'm parked down the road on the side of the road outside of the forbidden zone, but there's stickers on cars that are parked next to intersections, and they will ticket and tow tomorrow. Also, watch out for speeding. I am told that there's some unmarked cars and some pickup trucks out there running radar on Heckscher Drive that might be looking for you. I had a Porsche pass me this morning. Must have been doing 130. So that's not smart.
Oof. Wow. All right. Well, we mentioned that you've got a new column that's going to be in Jacksonville Today. Are you going to be reporting on this just briefly? Where could people find it?
I will have, on Monday morning, I'll have a full wrap-up of this event with some photos and hopefully a video of my interview with Helio Castroneves. At this point, though, I'm showing my car at the Main Beach Welcome Show, my old Alfa Romeo, just for the fun of it. I'm a car guy today, but tomorrow the reporter cap goes on, and I have some fun stuff that I'm looking forward to seeing.
Well, good luck at the Concours de Lemon, or that you enter. Where is your?
No, it's a regular car show I entered this year. So there.
Oh, okay, all right. And where's your column going to appear, though?
It'll be in Jacksonville Today. We plan to start. We had one this week, the Nissan Murano. I believe it's going to start running at noon on Mondays on Jacksonville Today on our website, and then we're going to have a separate car section at some point. I've been doing car reviews for 30 plus years, so I've got 7 in the can right now, ready to rock and roll.
All right. Well, Dan Scanlon, live at the Concours d'Elegance. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ann. See ya.
Up next, from steinholding to Dachshund Racing, we'll tell you what's on tap at the next San Marco Beer Fest.
Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. One text or call can wreck it all. Learn more through distracted driving presentations for teens and the workforce. Arrive alive. Let's end distracted driving.
More at TerrellHoganLaw.com.
Addressing pediatric health through housing, food security, and literacy. I'm Dr. Joe Servin. Join me tomorrow at 4 for What's Health Got to Do with It, only in WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville.
On the next Fresh Air, we listen back to an interview with David Johansen. He died last week. He was a founding member of the New York Dolls, a legendary 1970s band that never sold many records, but paved the way for punk rock. He also performed in his persona, Buster Poindexter, a pompadour-wearing lounge lizard. Join us.
Today at 1 on WJCT News 89.9.
The Florida Roundup will be live from Gainesville this week with a studio audience. The state's flagship university is looking for a new leader. Are you a Gator alum or parent or grandparent of a Gator? What do you want in the next president of the university? Free speech on campus, money for research, a sports championship. What should be the priorities for the bosses at Florida's public universities? Email us radio@thefloridaroundup.org. I'm Tom Hudson. Then join us Friday noon until 1.
Loud.
The chair now directs the sergeant at arms to restore order.
And proud.
We are just getting started.
And is joined to dress, Donald Trump rallies his base and hails the work of Elon Musk, but his tariff plan roils the market. All that and more on the Roundup, next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, if you're feeling like a weekend filled with feats of strength, wiener dogs, and beer yoga, well, remarkably, there is an event for you. Here to tell us about the 4th annual San Marco Beer Fest is Leah Rossler, Executive Director of the San Marco Merchants Association. Good morning, Leah.
Good morning. How are you?
And Lance Smoak from Ardwolf Brewing. Good morning, Lance.
Good morning.
I have to tell you, I was Googling the Ardwolf because I was like, is this really a thing?
They actually exist.
It's a real thing. And so, first of all, Ardwolf Brewing is like the second thing that comes up when you Google Ardwolf. But the first thing that comes up are these pictures that I found of these adorable creatures. And they really are. They're kind of like hyena looking, but
cute
small.
little baby
They're
hyenas.
cute, yeah. Where did that come from?
So the Latin word for hops, lupulus, is very similar to the Latin word for Ardwolf. So that's where the name originated.
Huh, interesting.
Go figure.
Well, more you
Learn
know.
something new.
The more you know.
Right, exactly. So, Leah, this festival is now in its 4th year. It's a San Marco staple. Are there new things this time that people should expect?
Well, in addition to having a few new breweries and whatnot that Lance will talk about more in a second, we have added beer yoga this year. So you don't have to be a practiced seasoned yogi. You can be a beginner. It's okay, but you're going to have a nice glass of Ardwolf beer to sip on while you're stretching.
Wow. Do people have to bring mats or do they just
Yes,
show up?
bring your own mat, wear comfy clothes, but we'll provide the beer.
This is Saturday, and so this particular bit of entertainment is at 1:30. I'm sure some people can come and watch.
Yes.
And you say you don't have to be a practicing yoga expert. You do need a beer, but it doesn't have to be alcoholic beer, right? There are some NA offerings despite the
Yes,
name.
we do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
tell us about that.
We have wolf water. It's basically just a light hoppy water that people can drink. So, and then there'll be other things out there as well.
Yeah. We're seeing some pictures. I guess this is of last year's festival. Very well attended, beautiful weather. It looks like it's going to be a nice day Saturday here as well.
It should be. We've been keeping an eye on it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
and
looks like it's
keeping-
going to clean up and just be a little rainy far later.
What's the idea behind the festival? I mean, what does this do to support the merchants in San Marco since you're representing that agency?
The ultimate goal is to bring people to San Marco and highlight what we offer and what a unique space the San Marco Square is. There are obviously other areas, especially in the urban core, that have similar shopping districts, but because we have Bayless Park in the middle, we really have kind of a unique feel and energy in San Marco. So by bringing everyone in, we constantly have heard the last few years, oh, I've never been here. I've lived in Jacksonville a while. I'm visiting, whatever the case may be. And they just love the charm. And then we use those dollars to fund efforts throughout the year, beautification, other events that support the community, and of course, supporting the businesses, which is our ultimate goal, because having a thriving business district in our neighborhood is what can help the neighborhood as a whole be a great place to be.
So there are going to be food trucks, but there are also, obviously, all the restaurants in that area are going to be open, serving.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yes.
So other than the beer yoga, which is a fun new addition, there is a favorite event, this wiener dog race.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Tell us how
Oh
that
my
goes down.
gosh.
Yep. There's a
It's
picture of it right there.
Yes, it's so cute. It's sponsored by Earth Pets San Marco. They put together these incredible baskets for the prizes. My mind was blown last year. It
Oh,
was
it
the
was
first
amazing.
year, and they were these giant baskets. Incredible. So if you have a dachshund, bring it just for a chance to get one of those baskets. But yeah, it's a great time. Everyone brings their little weenies and starts at the starting line and lets them go, and whoever gets the other side first wins.
And so, of course, Aardwolf is, one of the participants, but there are a bunch of breweries. So how do they get to participate, and how many are actually going to be there?
So we should have around 25. Everybody's bringing out some special stuff. We're doing like kind of hyper local, so just in this area. So it's very unique in that way that there's not a lot of the big major brands, and a lot of non-distributed brands.
Mhm.
So you try most every brewery from around Jacksonville all at once.
I see on this list, Dog Rose from St. Augustine, Mayport Brewing, Ruby Beach, Fishweir Brewing in Murray Hill. So really a broad representation of the
Oh yeah,
area.
all around.
Yeah.
Bernardino, St. Augustine, Jacksonville. We actually added a Ocala brewery this year, so just kind of in this neighborhood.
Yeah. So in terms of getting there, participating, Leah, what can people do to prepare for traffic? Because we know that it can be a very busy area in San Marco.
Yes, there is a parking tab on the website that has more information, but the easiest thing to do would be to use the shuttle. Baptist is generous enough to allow people to park at one of their lots off of Naira, and then a shuttle will bring you right into the square and right back to your car.
Baptist Hospital.
Yes.
Okay. So people can park in their parking garage?
Yes, it's one of the parking lots. The address is on the website,
Okay.
sanmarcobeerfest.com. So you can find the information there. But we'll also have signs, but it's Naira. So where JOI is on San Marco Boulevard, and then at Hendricks where V Pizza is.
Okay. Also going to be some beer stein holding contest. This is the feats of strength.
Oh, yeah.
That should be a lot of fun, where
Yeah.
people hold out a beer stein as long as they can, kind of parallel to the ground.
It's
So
harder
Yeah.
than you would think.
I can imagine.
Yeah, it's tough.
Get your workout in. You can do the yoga. You can do the beer stein holding
All of it.
contest. All right. Well, good luck this weekend. I hope it's a ton of fun. Thanks so much for being here, Leah Rossler, Lance Smock. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right, and thank you for listening. That's our program. If you have feedback or comments or suggestions, you can send them to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org, or you can email us at WJCT, First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. I think I just said that. Thanks for joining us. Please come back again Monday. We're going to be discussing why downtown traffic has had some serious gridlock and when you might see some relief. I'm Jen Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Congressman Penn, dedicated to agriculture and culinary endeavors, offering field-to-fork dining and outdoor experiences on over 300 acres. Sip, dine, explore. Information at congressmanpenn.com.